Okay, I am live. It's the Nazarite bringing you Hebrew lore from days of yore. So I'm going to do two things, God willing. First, I'm going to finish the chat from last week. I think little Andre wrote a few messages there. I'm going to read them. And next thing I'm going to do is, Robert, if you're there, others who may be joining or watching, or I don't know, there's a link over there. That is a link to a portion from a book called Daily Wisdom. It's a Chabad book, a Hasidic book, with teachings by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Now, when we are at work after lunch, we have a short study session. and I usually can follow, even though I'm not a Hasidic man, I'm usually able to follow. What what was read there today, I couldn't quite follow it. And then we had to get back to work. I didn't understand it fully, and so that's in the link. And that's what I want to do. So first I'm going to continue the chat. Andre said, right, we were speaking of names and how little Andre's mom and Paula Harrison share the same maiden name. So, okay. And little Andre said, yep, well, Paula and I are family. I suppose, he says, because all Laubschers are family. Laubschers are family, just as all Hurwitzes are probably family somehow. Well, most of them are family. If not family, then they do originate in the same village in the Czech kingdom, right? The old Czech kingdom. Little Andre continued and said, nor am I a Nazarite. Excuse my English for those who don't know yet. I don't deem myself worthy of being called a Nazarite anymore, he said, and might start consuming grapes and grape products again. Right, so little Andre making quite a shift there, or possibly making quite a shift there. But on the one hand, what's in a name? On the other hand, I personally think that to not deem yourself worthy sometimes can be a trap in and of itself. You need to really discern, I think. I need to really discern and not have genuine humility and not false humility. Not that I'm saying that that's the case with little Andre. Far be it from me to judge or say anything about his humility or lack thereof. To not deem yourself worthy of being called a Nazarite. I think that this is partly why the name of Nazarite stays on the man or woman even after their vow is done, according to the Torah, because they are referred to as Nazarites. Right? It says, and then the Nazarite will drink wine after the hair is shorn, after the meal is right, the fire is kindled, and then right, he or she bring their offerings, their Nazarite offerings of fulfillment of the vow, and then it says, and then the Nazarite will drink wine. I've mentioned this before. Why on earth would the Torah continue to refer to this man or woman as Nazarite when they had clearly just ended their vow? But I think it speaks to the power of the Nazarite vow, where there's a rule, teaching, a rule, a law. Ma'alin bakodesh ve'in moridin. Right? We lift up sacredness. We do not put it down. Right? We ascend. We do not descend. Meaning that when we arrive at a certain point, a certain milestone, or simply another peak of goodness, of true, genuine goodness, to the degree that we can manage it, to each his own. There's something there, if we're talking about sacredness, if we're talking about righteousness and truth and justice, the pillars of what it means to be good, right? Those, mm, let's say, I'm not going to say feelings, but we occupy a time and space, and that's in the physical world. I do believe that there are certain areas of us as living creatures, as beings. I believe we are more than that. And it's in those meta areas, if you will. It's in those places where something was reached, something was unlocked that cannot be locked again. Meaning, once you arrive at a certain place of sacredness and righteousness, even if it's only for a time, that place, that time when you occupied it, it stays in its brilliance. And even though you may come down from your spiritual high and find yourself still flawed and broken and inadequate, there's something about that height that you had touched, that you actually did arrive at, that keeps going, or that has the potential to keep going, and it shines in its brilliance still, even after you have come down, as it were, of that high. We all have highs and lows in this life. Ma'alin b'kodesh ve'in moridim. The Nazarite remains a Nazarite in some ways, even after they break their vow, even after they fulfill their vow. Not break, fulfill. Now, you could say, nah, Jonathan, you're reading way too much into it. It just says Nazarite because this person was a Nazarite for as long as they were. But I see it as a kind of the Torah alluding to the Nazariteship and its potential. And maybe in part, the reason why the Torah continues to refer to the Nazarite as one, even after he or she have just fulfilled their vow at the temple, is because there's that light of the Nazariteship that they partook of, or channeled, went with, walked with, that divine revelation manifested through the Nazariteship. And there's always a chance that they will be Nazarites again. So that part of them that was the Nazarite is not all gone. Physically, they may consume grapes again. Physically, they may cut their hair. Physically, they may be defiled by death. But there's something there which influences their life if they would care to let it influence. Something that still shines in its brilliance as though the Nazarite was still a Nazarite. So, not deeming yourself worthy of being called one. It's like those of us of the Hebrew faith, of the tribes who take this vow, especially now without a temple. There's a reason why it's for life, right? Especially now without a temple. So here's what I'm saying to you, little Andre. I hope that if it is supposed to be, and if you are so inclined, that you'll, and if you are right, if you are called to that path again, that you heed the call, and if you aren't, that you don't force it on yourself in some sort of a, well, in a way that would be wrong. The Nazariteship, like the Rambam says, and coming down from our sages, again bringing it down, that a person who vows simply to be called a Nazarite and be considered holy, yeah, blah blah blah, that's not a good Nazariteship. That's a sinning Nazarite because they miss the mark. But a person who makes the Nazarite vow in order to form some sort of boundaries and in order to um, walk a narrower but much deeper path insofar as it pertains to them, right? It's a very personal and individual vow. A very narrow thing, but very, very deep, infinitely deep. So I hope that you're called to it again if you're supposed to be called to it. Let's see. Hey, Pinky. Little Andre continues and says it to Robert. Again, it's not a question of whether he can, right? Talking about God, and I don't remember what it was. Right, it was a few days ago, and I don't remember, so it's sort of out of context right now. Unfortunately, I'm just gonna. Robert asks little Andre if he will keep his hair. That's an interesting question, little Andre. If you're watching, do tell. Are you going to keep your hair? We're curious. Hey, Pinky Lou. Okay, she's on the couch with me. Hot date. Okay, and the last comment from little Andre here. Okay, so continuing where I left off last time, he said, as I was saying, if there's one thing that's true that the Lord of the Rings says, and I agree with a few things, it's where Éomer told Éowyn, war is the province of men, Éowyn. What do you mean? That's one of the only things that are true? That's one thing that's true? War is the province of men, let's say statistically, and de facto, I'm assuming most of the wars were begun and fought and decided by men. But verily, there were women warriors. I'm sure in almost every culture, almost every people, there were women who were also warriors. Not necessarily military, they could be guerrilla, but definitely warriors. Now, again, if you're talking about feminine masculine, that's a different issue. I would argue that there's a kind of um, that it has to do with certain traits, right, and certain proclivities, certain tendencies. that would lead a woman to become a combat soldier, let's say, or any kind of a warrior, or perhaps even a martial artist. I don't know, but that's different. So that's the one thing. What else do you agree with the Lord of the Rings, though, Andre? Okay. All right. So there are people here. There are 6 people here and 4 likes. Hello. Hi there. Please, there's a link that is pinned to the chat. If you want to study with me along with me now today, let's get it on. As I was saying before, for a few of you show up, Robert was here. We learned something today at work. I didn't quite get it fully, and so I'm going to read it now to you and go through it myself and see if I can figure out what's going on here. So the link is to a Chabad book, well, a Chabad website. So right, Hasidic, and it's taken from a book called Daily Wisdom, which is the lore of Rabbi Shneur Zalman Shneur Lubavitch, right? The Lubavitcher Rebbe. Yeah, Shneur Zalman Lubavitch, right? The Lubavitcher Rebbe. So let's read. I'm after the beginning of the page. It says soul aspiration, and I'm going to read from the brackets and then down. So if you want, join me. I'll try and read slowly, also because I'm trying to figure it out myself. I only heard it today once, and I didn't quite get it. So let's see. Just a quick recap. Moses tells the people of Israel not to go in the ways of the foreign nations which they are going to conquer, and he tells them, be strong to not consume the blood. The blood, right, is the nefesh. The blood is that vitality. And do not eat the nefesh, don't eat the blood with the meat. Pour the blood on the ground. And now we read. Moses told the Jewish people that when they eat meat, they must be resolute not to consume the blood. From Deuteronomy 12:23 in this week's Torah portion. And now I'm reading over there. Inasmuch as the blood of an animal embodies its vitality, it might seem that consuming blood in order to utilize this vitality for holy purposes would actually be praiseworthy and an effort to refine the material world. Okay, I'm going to go this piece by piece here. So, right, the Rebbe is saying here that we would think that if consuming meat is elevating it, right, if consuming meat in a sacred way, right, through kosher butchering and all of that, if that is praiseworthy, and that's the meat, then the blood, which is the very vitality of the animal, that must be even more praiseworthy. Okay, I'm continuing. It is therefore necessary to distinguish between meat and its blood. So the Rebbe says no. The meat and the blood are served kind of 2 different things. You're supposed to partake of the meat, you're not supposed to partake of the blood, and we must distinguish between them. You'd think the blood would also be consumed, since it's the very vitality of the animal, and that would be even more praiseworthy than the meat, perhaps. But he says no, and I'm continuing. Meat signifies the material world itself, which we are capable of enjoying in a holy way. Blood, however, signifying the vitality and enthusiasm of life, cannot be enjoyed itself, for it is impossible to enjoy pure enjoyment in a selfless, holy way. And this is where there's one more short paragraph, those of you who are on the page can see. But I'm going to stop here right now, because this is the part where I go, huh? Blood, since it's the enthusiasm and vitality, says the Rebbe, cannot be enjoyed itself. For it is impossible to enjoy pure enjoyment in a selfless, holy way. Okay, so that means that things that are part enjoyment, not pure enjoyment, things that are part enjoyment that have to do more with the physical world, really the real down and dirty, nasty, stanky funk of the physical world, and that's the meat, that part can be partaken of in a sacred way. Because because it has to do with this life and this material world, because that's what it signifies, we're able to enjoy it. But the blood that signifies the very vitality of the creature, that is higher, and we cannot enjoy pure enjoyment. We cannot enjoy that higher thing that higher physical aspect of the animal in a selfless, holy way. Okay, we can enjoy things that are more earthly, but the blood has a unique property, an elevated status, and that we cannot enjoy. He says it's impossible to enjoy pure enjoyment in a selfless, holy way. So, kind of reversing that, I would say it's possible to not enjoy it in a selfish way. It's possible to not enjoy it in a selfish way. It it is possible to not enjoy it in a selfless way, in a selfish way. I don't know. Let's finish the paragraph following it, and then we'll see if someone has something to say. Thus, continues the Rebbe. Thus, blood may be offered up on the altar as part of a sacrifice, for then it is oriented solely towards holiness. Okay, the meat becomes part of us, of our earthly body. The blood is higher, and so we do not consume it, right? Low goes to low. The meat of the animal goes to my meat. The blood of the animal, which is higher, goes to a higher place, right? It aligns. The low with the low, the high with the high. Okay. So when you offer it as part of a sacrifice, not eating just for the sake of eating, not slaughtering for the sake of slaughtering, as a sacrifice, then it's oriented solely towards holiness, and in that it kind of complements the vitality that the blood signifies. Okay. And then the Rebbe continues, but if it is part of the simple act of eating, oriented merely toward preserving and enhancing the life of the body itself, it must be avoided. So blood can be shed, blood can be offered on the altar because that matches its level. The blood cannot go down. The blood cannot go down to the part where we consume it and it becomes part of our body. Right? Ma'alin b'kodesh, ve'ein moridin. This is the perfect example of how we raise up in sacredness, right? In holiness, and we do not go down. We do not um, we do not take away. We go up and not down. Meaning that if you're going to bleed an animal, if you're going to sacrifice it, or if you're going to eat it, don't consume it. Don't consume it. It needs to be aligned there with the higher thing. If you're eating for the sake of eating, then you can enjoy the meat, but not the blood. But if you're making a sacrifice, then the blood can be offered. It's still not to you because you're just you will be consuming it. But as a sacrifice, it's oriented, as he says, solely towards holiness. Okay, let's continue. So if it has to do with the body, it must be avoided. He continues and says, the Rebbe says, we should aspire to become excited and enthusiastic solely about holy matters, rather than about material matters in and of themselves. So the idea of not eating the blood is that you should align the highs. Wait, no, okay. So he said the thing with the meat and the blood, why we should distinguish. But the finishing sentence, the last sentence is we should aspire to become excited and enthusiastic solely about holy matters. Just like the blood, which is the excitement and vitality and enthusiasm of life, is solely poured and offered, not well, poured and offered, right, thrown on the altar. Okay, the things which are higher, the things which make us feel high, should be holy matters rather than material things. Okay, so I think now that I went through it sentence by sentence, I think I understand what the Rebbe is talking about. Any other does anyone have any other anything to say here? Okay, so let's see, there's people in the chat. So let's read the chat. And it's 20 minutes. Gonna go soon. Okay. Shalom in Jeremiah. Shalom typo. I'm currently in the book of Jeremiah, says the burning element. Hello, burning element. Robert says, you just read it, blood not to be consumed. Just read it, he says. Robert said, okay. The burning element says, question, is one allowed to meditate on Yod He Vav He with its proper vowels? One is encouraged to do so. If that is the name that you would like to meditate on. You can meditate on all of the names of the Most High in all of the different configurations. What you cannot do, according to most, is utter them. Some of them you are allowed to utter, and some of them, because they represent more specific things, and some you ought to be contemplating and meditating on, but not um, but not but not saying out loud, like in its proper vowels. But yes, it's not only allowed; it's very much encouraged by those who do it. Robert says, I personally found today in Numbers 15, verses 15, 16, in what I believe abolishes the idea of Noahides. Okay, let's read this quickly. Numbers 15. Let's do this in the JPS Tanakh here. Numbers 15, 15 JPS. Okay. Now I'm assuming we're getting again into the Ger Toshav and and Ger Tzedek thing. Okay. Yep. As for the congregation, says the Torah, there shall be one statute both for you and for the stranger that sojourneth with you, the statute forever throughout your generations. As ye are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. One law and one ordinance shall be both for you and for the stranger that sojourneth with you. So yes, it's the idea of ger toshav and ger tzedek, and we addressed this in the past. And if you think that it abolishes the idea of Noahides, it might. I don't know as much as I probably could or should about Noahides. I know that it's the idea of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. So if that's the idea, what the Torah basically means here, according to most people and interpreters, from what I've studied, is that it means in the land of Israel, meaning outside of the land of Israel. If you're a Gentile, you can be a Noahide by definition if you choose to attach yourself with a covenant to the Hebrew God, and the Hebrew God, right, the Creator, the Most High, and take on those commandments, then you can be a Noahide, I think. Now some say that there is no Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, there is no seven commandments of the sons of Noah, because they definitely are commanded to do certain things right then and there when they leave the ark, but other things were kind of put on there, tacked on there. Again, I don't know. I do know that the idea of Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach is pushed very hard by Chabad, or at least some facets of Chabad are really pushing this, because if you are not a dweller in the land of Israel, you can be a righteous Gentile by keeping the Noahide laws and accepting God as your creator, something along those lines. Once you set foot in Eretz Israel, you need then to accept the sovereignty and rule of the Hebrew people on the land, biblically, right? And adhere to those laws that are more specific to those who live there, if I'm not mistaken. And should you come and make yourself part of the people, part of the nation, make a covenant, and join the tribes, then well, that's a righteous convert. But I think it is very much possible to be a righteous Gentile outside of the land of Israel if you don't worship foreign gods, right? And if you keep that covenant between you and the Most High. There's probably more to it that I'm not thinking of right now, but yeah. So I don't know if it abolishes it or not, but it certainly puts some sort of parameter around it. Javier says, "Evening, folks. What about when Gandalf says something down the lines of true courage is knowing when to spare a life rather than to take one?" Yes, when he speaks of mercy. And he said it was mercy that stayed Bilbo's hand. And what's lovely is that, if I'm not mistaken, in the book that I read, mercy is capitalized as if, right, it's a thing, and it really, really is. Mercy stayed his hand, and then he said it could be. And what did he say? The what Bilbo did that day could decide the fate of many, something like that. He says, yeah, courage is knowing when to spare life and to right rather than take one. Are you the one who will make the decision? Can you make the decision? There are those who are alive that ought to be dead, and ones who are dead that ought to be alive. But can you make the choice? Are you that guy? The burning element says, "In my own, the Torah makes it clear. The blood is the soul, as you said, because we are still in the flesh. It's too holy, right? It's too holy. Oh, okay. So yes, so it's too holy. Right, I see. Sorry, I thought he may continue later. Elias said, or I am no man, right? Deep, deep wisdom. Now, that's in the movie. In the book, she says it a little differently, and she, well, anyway, yeah. But I am no man is also pretty badass. The blood belongs to God, not us, says Robert. Yeah, so it's the Torah is teaching us here to distinguish, right? There are subtleties, much like there are subtleties of sacredness when it comes to the sacredness of the Shabbos or the sacredness of the new moon or the sacredness of the festival, this holiday or that holiday. There are levels, nuances, there are subtleties of sacredness in the world. And that is part of it, right? Distinguishing the meat from the blood and saying, no, 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 no. The high needs to be aligned. And we should aspire that the low would be so aligned as well, that our highs will be able to be reserved for high things. I mean, that's certainly not the case with me, you know. I get my highs where I can, as it were. Some physical, some less physical. Hello, Jonathan. So flesh to flesh. Yes, Eiler, flesh to flesh indeed. Correct, says the burning element. The low with the world of Yod Hey, right? So the word, the letters Yod Hey Vav Hey, where the Yod and the tip of the Yod and the Hey, the first Hey represent the three top sfirot, and the Vav Hey represent the lower seven. So he says to the low with the world of Yod Hey, and the holy with the hidden world of Vavhe. Well, it's interesting that you call that the hidden world, because the Vavhe is where all of this goes down, right? In Malchut. The highest level belongs to Hashem, because we are not holy, or at least on that level. Well, we certainly can be holy and can be on that level. The whole idea is that Yod He Vav He and that revelation of the Most High is supposed to be something that we can channel and that we can align with and mirror, like I said, right? Blood to altar, says Eiler, the separation of blood and flesh, so is therefore to ritually show that the body is considered a lower plane of existence. Not the body, the meat is the meat, the body, the blood is also part of the body. I think it says that if you look into anything, you can always discern and differentiate. Even with a butchered animal, you can still find nuances, you can still find subtleties there and ways of distinguishing, differentiating, discerning between highs and lows. I think that when you do that in your everyday life, discern, constantly being discerning with your highs and lows, I think it orients you to arrive at that soul aspiration that Rabbi Midubavitch talked about, that the Rebbe talked about, where he said we should aspire to get our highs from holy things, like the blood belongs on the altar and not in us, and not solely right from material things. So yeah, definitely, definitely. Now, a lower plane of existence is a double-edged. It not is it has two sides, right? On the one hand, it's called the lower plane of existence. On the other hand, if imagine this world is the string on a bow, right? Where you fit an arrow and then you pull down, down, down. What is it that you're trying to do? You're trying to get as much pressure and tension there, so when you let go, it will fly as high as it possibly can. You want to get that arrow really high. And in order to get really high, you first must get really low and then loose. In the same way, it's the lower plane of existence, but it's through this body, this lower plane of existence, this meat consuming, even though I don't consume meat anymore for the sake of this Torah portion and stuff, this meat consuming body, even this meat consuming, even that he which inhabits this meat consuming body knows that on the one hand you're consuming the meat, on the other hand you are either pouring the blood or offering it as a sacrifice, right? Pouring it if you just want to eat the meat, offering it if you want to sacrifice it, or to have a proper sacrifice of animal origin. The Torah and Rabbi Lubavitch here, he's saying that to differentiate, but it's through that discernment, that we will be able to be that much more precise. Now, I'm not saying that one should get lower and lower and lower for the sake of then shooting up higher. That can be very dangerous and very risky. Um, and I won't get into it now. Let's just say, definitely for me, in times where I did feel that I was doing that, it was very risky, and it did not end well ever. Ever. Maybe it did occasionally, but let's continue the chat here. Robert says your last Torah portion was awesome with both your sons and Pinky. Yeah, they really, really wanted to be on. I was like, all right, I have a soft spot for summertime. I do have a soft spot for summer. Couldn't believe today in my Torah reading, says Robert, after the Most High swallowed up Korach, Datan, and Aviram, that the people was going to stone Moses and Aaron. Yeah, they were like, "Oh my God, everybody is dying. Will people stop dying? When is it gonna end?" 31 minutes. Okay, a half hour is a good time to call it a night. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining me in today's study. And if you have any other insights into that bit by the Rebbe Milubavitch, right, on in the link, do share in the comments. Until tomorrow, I hope, or maybe Wednesday. But until then, until we meet again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your kind attention. I don't take it for granted. It's lovely to learn with you. Those watching now, those watching later, thank you for the views, the subs, the likes, the engagement. It's such a pleasure to do this. Let's have a good day, a good night. I'll see you another time. God bless.